Lotus Turbo, Propose in Glasgow, and Where Are All the Birdo? It's September 1990, and this is Yesterzine. The one for Amiga games, possibly the most unwieldy name ever given to a single format magazine, and one, that people remember with a fondness only rivalled by Amiga Power, the magazine equivalent of those kids who always sat on the back row of the school bus. The name, though, comes from the one's slightly checkered beginnings. The one we know isn't the one. It's Ace magazine. When that multi-format magazine closed in April 1992, the entire staff were moved on to the one, creating the magazine and look that became its most well-known form. This basic formula would then continue for its remaining 4 years as a credible magazine, before it was sold to Maverick Magazines, who proceeded to spend the next year or so attempting to beat Shit Magazine out of a stone. At this point though, the one was already a year old as an Amiga magazine, having launched with issue 32 in May 1991. Wait, what? And here's where we get to, as they say, the point. The One originally appeared back in 1988 as The One for 16-bit games, updating to the even snappier The One for Amiga, Atari ST and PC games in June 1990. When The One for Amiga games was created in 1991, there was also a The One for ST games. Confusingly, both these distinct magazines had their premieres badged as Issue 32. PC gamers? Well, they could go whistle for another year or so. People don't remember The One for ST games too much, if at all, and that's not surprising, since by the time The One got its makeover in 92, The One for ST games was already dead. It's a mercy they didn't go the whole hog and call this multi-format incarnation The One for Commodore Amiga, Atari 1632, and International Business Machines Personal Computer and Compatible games. But would a magazine by any other name still contain a review of Venus the Flytrap? Presumably it would, but this issue certainly does, and since it's a game I remember fondly, we're going to revisit. But there's a reason I do so with some trepidation. Elsewhere, The One spotlights Magnetic Fields, a developer who were surprisingly long-lived and released everything for everything, but they're only really remembered for driving games on the Amiga. We're not going to get to play any of those though, unless we can sort out climate change. We're going to see a bit of Gremlin graphics this episode, but we start here with a plot that hasn't become less relevant in 30 years. Human beings have ruined the Earth to the point it can no longer sustain life. As a last-ditch effort, they create a bunch of robotic insects to replace the ones that are no longer getting splattered on your windscreen at night. Their software, though, had a bug. Again, sorry. Instead of restoring the fauna, they curb-stomped what remains instead. The solution is clear. Interstellar colonization and full oh no, we've just built a bigger bug. That'll do it. Listen to this, though. I think as a kid it was the intro that got me. Coming from the Spectrum, a machine just casually chucking this out at you was where the generational leap was for me. I mentioned trepidation though, and that's because of my old chum and Wayland-Yutani colleague, Geigerpunk. He asked for ideas on what games to play a few weeks back, and I suggested he take a look at this. You'll see the full results in the description below, but while he was hampered by visual issues on his A1200 to the point it later became unplayable, he also wasn't exactly grabbed by the gameplay.
Dudley, what have you got me into?
It's certainly more Lee Trevino's putting challenge than Bone Storm to start off with. I'm going to make a few spurious comparisons to Zool in the next few minutes, so let's start now. Zool's intro is full 90s in your face. It couldn't be louder if it was wearing a pink shell suit and driving a mini metro with an exhaust the size of Canada and so much neon lighting it uses more power than the engine does. Venus's, you'll have noticed, was slower. Downbeat, befitting its subject matter to be fair, but even I'd contend it's on the edge of being labelled dull. Zool wants you to run around like you're on fire at all times. The music, in those versions that can play that in-game, reflects this, as does everything about the control method and, most of the time, the level designs. Venus? Not so much. It's so laid back it's horizontal. Literally so, since the game does not appear to have any vertical scrolling. The character is not minded to shoot across the screen, although, similar to Zool, he does in fact shoot. Answering the question as to what Venus actually is doesn't come easy either. The game, I mean. The character is a robotic fly designed to kill other small robotic insects. In which case, naming him after both a planet that isn't Earth and a plant famously designed to kill the thing he most resembles is certainly an interesting bit of marketing. But the game. Is it a platformer? Well, technically yes, in that you jump a bit. Sometimes onto platforms, sometimes across small gaps, but I've not encountered any true platforming sections with multiple jumps inside the first world of the game. Nor have I encountered any difficult jumps, although you'll have already noticed that didn't stop me missing one of them right at the start. But all of them are well within Vegas's AMayGa capabilities, and where they're not, the game gives you boost pads. So is it a run and gun? Well, a walk and gun maybe, but you do indeed traverse a level at broadly your own speed and shoot things. But in World 1 at least, representing 5 levels and a full tenth of the game, nothing shoots back. The nearest thing to a bullet are the occasional small flies who make their way across the screen. The enemies themselves aren't energetic either. The most excitement is when the one who could be your mum goes in for a bit of light bouncing. The biggest challenges for a lot of this world in both running and shooting is when you try to balance on the edge of a platform in order to shoot and then loot the jumping enemies. Looting is worth it because the game does have a range of weaponry to help you out. Pretty early on you'll be getting the Big Shot, which does double the damage of your starting weapon, but only costs the same 1 ammo. This feels like it's going to be essential since the game doles out a limited amount of ammo for each level, so there's going to be no firing like a teenager on first spring break here. And that's okay. Everything about this game feels slow, methodical. There's nothing wrong with that. It'd be a perfectly nice chill out game if it continued like this. It goes on for 10 worlds, they don't need to get a lot harder if the visuals and enemies evolve. Judging by my time in World 1, that'd make it a roughly 2-hour game for a run through. Looking at our favourite long play source, it's 2 hours 43 at World of Long Plays, which is almost exactly double the length of Zool. So great, a background game, an end of day game, a sit back with some nice music on and spend some alone time quietly progressing on it game. It even gives you a password every world, so you could work your way through it at your leisure. But then the twist. Someone thought that what this relaxing, slow-paced, sort of platformer, sort of shooter needed was time limits. I don't get this at all. It smacks of a design born out of we've always done it this way. Most 8-bit platformers have time limits. Mario has time limits, therefore we must. Even if we don't have a bunch of other stuff they do and aren't really the same thing. In practice, in World 1, they're not too invasive, but they're also not so lenient as to be irrelevant. This becomes doubly so on the final stage of the world, where parts of the floor will actively suck the time away from you in incredibly rapid fashion. And while this continues, a lot of them, you only get 3 lives and 1-ups seem very rare. The game isn't devoid of other tricks either. There's a few sections in World 1 where you gravity swap and the game plays along the ceiling instead. Given this is supposedly on Earth, I'm not entirely sure where the physics logic is in that, but it does result in what might be a unique control method in Amiga gaming. You've tried up to jump, now enjoy down to jump. Take that, Amiga power! Or they would, if it wasn't nearly a year before they were launched. It seems that they genuinely weren't entirely sure what they were making here, and that's understandable. Zool, avoiding the obvious bug jokes, comes from a different world reflecting the influences on Amiga games at the time. Venus is early. It's pre-Mega Drive in this country, for instance. Sonic doesn't exist yet. Its ancestors are those 8-bit platform games like Manic Miner. It's attracting very similar players, and that probably accounts for why the one's 83%, while seemingly generous, is on the very low end of the scores received. It got 95 from the Games Machine and 94 from CMVG somehow. While its 8-bitish design has aged badly, it's exactly what the market wanted. None of the 3 magazines that re-reviewed it on its 1992 re-release gave it less than 83 either, which in Amiga Action's case involved giving it 11% more than on original release. Maybe it was timing, because that re-release occurred a few months before the release of Zool. Zool, while its quality is still debated, got a very similar range of scores, but crucially represented how that market changed in a few short years. Zool is not looking at Manic Miner. Zool is not looking at Venus the Flytrap. Zool fancies itself a console game. Its brief is transparently to be Sonic but on the MIGI. Since that's explicitly Sonic 1, a flawed gem itself in many ways on 16-bit, it doesn't do a bad job, although it did not fare quite so well when it tried to go directly up against Sonic 2 and Mario World on those machines a couple of years later. So Venus is from another time. In a way, the gap between it and Zool represents a generational leap more so than the simple change in the amount of computing power did. It was as much a relic 2 years after release as it is now. Possibly more so, because some of its problems are of course problems I can avoid. Playing this as I am on the best and most morally correct miniature Amiga recreation available, the WHD enhanced version on AMayGa 3 allows a lot of tuning. In practice, the only one I'd probably go for is the removal of that time limit and maybe infinite credits. At that point, this becomes what it feels like it was always destined to be, and something that, while by no means essential, maybe isn't quite as dismissible as it might appear on the surface. Just maybe don't play it at Rob's house. If you owned an Amiga and had even a passing interest in cars, the following 10 seconds or so is going to be incredibly familiar. Magnetic fields, responsible for 2 of the Amiga's bigger racing series, the top-down Supercars and the 3D Lotus games. But this is September 1990, and of those games, only the first Supercars exists, although the excuse for this profile comes via a preview of the first Lotus game in this very issue. For such an iconic racing game name, with such a distinct audiovisual identity, the first thing to know about magnetic fields is they were founded with neither of those. The origins of magnetic fields lie in 8-bit mostly Commodore developer Mr. Chip software. Mr. Chip dated back to 1982 and was founded by its 2 most famous programming names, Andrew Morris and Sean Southern. But racing games did not follow immediately. The first year or so was a variety grab bag of genres, mostly on the VIC-20. There were gambling games, 3 great games of chance and Vegas Jackpot, the latter from a Mastertronic published original. Bugsy was not a crime-based strategy game as you might expect, but instead a bastard cross of Oh Mummy and Minesweeper. Rest easy though, because there were plenty of strategy games too. Wheeler Dealer was about the car manufacturing industry, the company's first brush with vehicle-based games. Red Alert about international espionage. And Westminster, where the object is to win a general election. I've not tried it, but I assume the easiest way to win is to simply pick Labour, then do literally everything the Tories do, and decry anyone who points this out as letting the Tories win. For instance, like. But that's not the first game we need to talk about, because it's a famous name. In 1983, Mr. Chip released 1987 Atari coin-op Pac-Mania to the Commodore 64. Wait, hang on a second. Yes, while this is Pac-Mania on the Commodore 64, this is Grand Slam's 1988 official conversion to the machine. What Mr. Chip did was inadvertently pre-rip off the name in order to very deliberately rip off the original game. I guess it's an obvious pun, and it's not like they could sue Atari for their later use of the name, given that this is closer to being a straight copy of Pac-Man than several of the official ports of Pac-Man are. But then, finally the first driving game, and it's not one many know they were involved in. Mastertronic were the 8-bit budget game publishers of record, and at one stage also distributors of history's greatest console. Their biggest selling game the entire run was Formula 1 Simulator. This doesn't tell the full story though, because the game sold as Formula 1 Simulator was a different game on each format. The PC version by Spirit looks like Checkered Flag, and there are other distinct versions on the Enterprise, and crucially, the Commodores. Finding out solid information on the various authors is tricky, but we're saved for our purposes by this Commodore 64 version crediting Mr. Chip on the title screen, and by a Zap review of the Commodore 16 version, which we will now have a dramatic reading of in full.
Though hardly realistic, Sean Southern's racing game is the best available for the C16.
14 words, but 2 of them are at least crucial. As you may remember, Sean is one of the 2 founders of Mr. Chip. Not a bad start for their racing game heritage that, a part in one of the best-selling racing games of all time. But they'd top that with their next motoring involvement, because it's one of the legends. Kickstart, legally distinct from British game show Kickstart in a way that only people reading the subtitles are going to fully appreciate. Kickstart the Show was a time trial competition involving dicking about on bikes, and the game likewise. If you played the modern Trials games, they're a faster paced iteration of the same basic idea. Stay on the bike, jump or crawl over the obstacles, do not crash. Kickstart the game though is basically impossible. It almost feels like it's from the school that thinks that making a game unresponsive makes it a simulation. The actions you need to take on specific obstacles are very much by rote. Vehicles have to be jumped, some surfaces have to be crawled over, and some require speed. Landing safely from any height requires some kind of arcane incantation and possibly written permission in triplicate. You will, inevitably, spend the majority of any game session of Kickstart waiting for the game to scroll slowly sideways until there's a safe place to put you back on the actual track. The idea is sound. The gameplay isn't, but it's still considered a classic. Zap's 90% review accepts the frustrations of gameplay, but I can't help but notice the times they're doing in the screenshot are not better than mine. But they point out the game is original, and it was, that it had 8 courses, and also that it was a straight-to-budget title from Mastertronic at £2. Yeah, fair enough. The real heyday of Magnetic, though, came with a publishing tie-up with this episode's stars, Gremlin Graphics. It was that collaboration that would eventually give us their 2 most famous series, and they followed up Sean's inexplicably Commodore 16 and Plus 4 exclusive Jet Bricks with a racing game. Sort of. Trailblazer was also originally on the 16, because why not have 4 different and mostly incompatible computer formats on the UK consumer market at the same time? It's the C64 version everyone knows, and if you didn't know this shared lineage with Kickstart, it would not take you long to figure it out. Trailblazer shared its options and game structure. The game still consists of 3 runs at a choice of 3 courses from the pool available. The display is still a fixed split screen even in single player, something we've also not seen the last of. Actually playing them back to back, despite the entirely disparate appearance of the 2 games, they have much in common. Trailblazer also involves making very precise decisions about how fast you can go based on obstacles, whose threat is not obvious. It is also just as bastard hard, although somehow not in such a frustrating way. Each of the coloured tiles affects your ball in set ways, be it speed up, jump, or just as solid walls. The cyan one is a particular note because today's hill I'm going to die on is that anything that reverses your controls would always make a game better by being removed, screwed up, thrown out the window, and then blown up. It has never made a game better, it never will. Trailblazer though points to their future games. It's a fast arcade racing game even if it hasn't got cars. The courses don't have turns, but they're full of obstacles and they have tight time limits. It was also their first 16-bit game, receiving an Atari ST port, and I believe is one of only 2 16-bit games to carry the Mr. Chip name. The music too at least hints at the style their Amiga titles especially would adopt. Trailblazer got the reception they were perhaps hoping Kickstart would. While Kickstart's reviews have been propped up by it being a £2 title, Gremlin sold Trailblazer for the full tenner on cassette, and while Zap noticed it was pricey, that didn't stop them sticking a Sizzler award and a full 93% score on it. There are more C64 titles. There was a sequel to Trailblazer, exclusive to the machine under the name Cosmic Causeway. It's got a full screen play area, but otherwise mostly has the same features and flaws as the first game. Then there was the Amiga debut, the other 16-bit Mr. Chip game. The Amiga conversion of Kickstart 2 was not handled by them, which is why I feel perfectly safe referring to it as possibly the ugliest single thing I have seen in my entire life. It also, though, has all the features and flaws as the first game, which seems even worse in this conversion because never has a supposedly 16-bit game felt more 8-bit. Amiga User International gave it 8 out of 10 because of course they did. Their review is a masterpiece of logic.
During the conversion, the graphics and sound have been improved slightly, although the game is the same. The bike controls are a little slow to react, and instead of being zapped by the fire, as in the 64 version, the rider merely falls off. But apart from these minor points, it is all being considerably improved.
So to sum up, a couple of things are slightly better, the most important thing is slightly worse, and they didn't even convert one of the major new features, so clearly it's much better. Okay then. If AUI had used percentages, this one would have had 73 scrawled all over it. A new generation requires a new name, and in 1988 Mr. Chip finally became Magnetic Fields. And while their next 3 games would still get 8-bit releases, Fields are now solidly an Amiga games company, and their prime begins with Supercars, a top-down racer that's probably more interesting now for setting up a gameplay template Magnetic would rarely divert from in their remaining years. Multiple levels of championships across more and more complex tracks, optionally with repairing and upgrades in the mix. It's a well-worn path in driving games now, and to be honest, there's probably better ways to see it. I'm not the hugest fan of the Supercars series now. I enjoyed them back in the day, but there's a lot of issues that come to light in hindsight. They're slow, the tracks are narrow and awkward, the AI literally just drives down the middle of the road. There's weapons, but they cost a lot and the computer seems to get a lot of them. Frequently, a crash is not your fault because you get taken out just before a jump, or the enemy has dropped a mine inside a tunnel. Worse, restarting takes an age and seems to occur in a near random location. I got through easy mode basically by trying to avoid crashes and just letting the AI run into things, rather than try to make too many passes on a track barely suited for the purpose. And then there's the interludes. While they were amusing the first time as a 12-year-old, now they're just a mechanism for costing you money, or worse, championship points. The driving test one has several questions where there's no right answer, so if there's an answer that avoids a penalty, you'll just have to learn it. It's the second one you've been watching, and it removes a couple of handling upgrades without actually improving the background handling, which has not helped the situation one bit. Amiga Power gave it 73%. They were right. By this issue though, we've only seen the first Supercars game, and we're previewing the next big thing. A racing game carrying a huge license and all their efforts. Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge. Knowing what we do about this series, that it would be the Amiga arcade racing series, that it would be popular enough that the second 2 games would make appearances on console, and that it would even spawn a semi-official spin-off series, the one are remarkably low-key. There's a driving game on the cover, but it's not this one. It gets a box out in the contents page claiming that the world's greatest sports cars are British made. Made is important there. At this time, Lotus was owned by the Americans and would pass through Luxembourg and Malaysia on its way to its current Chinese owners. Which already seems like I'm going on a lot about a car company when we're supposed to be talking about a game. But in my defence, we're actually talking about a magazine. The 2-page article in said magazine looks like a game preview at first glance, what with all the screenshots. Look closer though, and the text is 95% such an overt advert for the car company that you glance for the word advertorial at the top. I am still not convinced Lotus didn't pay for it. For instance, let me get the most British man I know to read the first paragraph of what I remind you is supposed to be a preview of a new video game.
Handling, performance and style. That's the philosophy of Lotus Cars Limited. And when it comes to manufacturing luxury cars, the company sticks rigidly to that order of criteria. the driver's enjoyment of the car is of paramount importance.
It's not subtle, is it? And the rest of it continues to read like a Year 9 essay on the car manufacturer itself. If it appeared in a magazine now, I'd suspect the hand of Wikipedia, or worse, ChatGPT. Only on the second page does it think to mention a game exists, but gives the barest of details on a title that would be reviewed in a mere 2 months' time. Possibly, out of sheer embarrassment, the caption writer adds some actual video game details to this video game preview of a video game. There are clues to the Mr. Chip lineage. It's pre-built for you, sure, but the game is still a straight run through a series of courses, and you're still stuck in the top half of a forced split screen even in one player, with the other screen showing the world's least stressed pit garage. Otherwise, most of what would define the other two more famous games in the series is here. 20 car races, winding 3D tracks, some blinding speed for the era, and obstacles littered all over the track. This is more than either of its sequels, a pure racing game. While it sadly can't name your opponents in-game, it's keeping track, and you'll need to score points in every race to continue. It does at least make sure the same CPU driver doesn't win every time, because the grid is reversed from the finishing positions of the last race, and even the best can't always race all the way through. There's strategy too. In a long race, you'll have to visit the pits for a top-up. A Lotus Esprit has a range of about 3 miles on a full tank, it seems. I never noticed it back in the day, but it seems like only your car needs fuel. I've never seen a CPU car take a stop. It does seem to straddle a generation. The AI are idiots, simply moving left and right on the screen and never following even your arcade physics. It also seems very easy to hit them, almost like they're marginally wider than the single lane. Nonetheless, there wasn't anything this good on the Amiga in the arse end of 1990. This first one gets forgotten. It's no one's favourite Lotus game, but class like this still lasts. You might even say it's guaranteed against corrosion for 8 years. But not guaranteed against being the best Lotus game for even 1 year, because 11 months later the sequel turned up, bringing with it one of the most recognisable pieces of music ever to come out of an Amiga. Barry Leitch's title theme for the game appears as track 2 on Amiga Power the Album, where it was remixed 30 years on by Barry Leitch. But he's far from the only one to do so. It pops up everywhere Amiga music is mentioned, and there are more versions on YouTube and Bandcamp than you can shake a CD-TV at. I'm especially fond of the work of D4XX on both sites, but you're spoilt for choice. The game too in some ways. You'll have noticed 2 things here almost immediately. One, that the 2-player split is gone, although it can be restored, and the game has a null modem link mode. But also, more subtly, you may have noticed a name change. This is merely Lotus Turbo Challenge. The Esprit has gone. In reality it hasn't. It's just been joined by its new mate the Allan. The Allan is a baby sports car in classic Lotus lightweight tradition. Sorry, I think I've read too much of that preview. And as such is slower and smaller than the Esprit. The game will alternate between them. Incredibly, this will not prove to be window dressing. Starting here with the Allan is smart for a first level, and both the car and the game are more forgiving than the first iteration. Incidental contact will not stop you dead, for instance, and it feels like even with that you've got more clearance on the side of the track. I said the game spoils you for choice in only some ways because the game part itself doesn't. Unlike the multi-championship approach of the first one, this is very simple. It's a time trial outrun style checkpoint game and nothing else. Lotus 2 is most people's favourite Lotus and the one that tended to be rated the highest. But it's its thinness that never endeared itself to me as someone who got both of them around Lotus 1's budget release. I was always a racer, and the championship, named drivers, wheel-to-wheel racing and ongoing story of a game like Lotus 1 felt like more of a complete experience than this does. Playing them back to back several decades on though, I can't deny the improvements. The full screen display is welcome, sure, but ultimately it makes less difference than you'd think given you're mostly looking at the bottom anyway. The handling though is notably improved, something that becomes obvious when you get back in the quicker Esprit and are given a wide open highway to fly down. Stretching its legs, you're reminded that even more than the first title a year earlier, no one else was quite doing this. The obvious two names anyone would throw out are Jaguar XJ220 and Crazy Cars 3. Both of those were still a year away, and at this point if you said Crazy Cars, then Amiga owners would have to think of this. Yeah. Even when things slow down, it excels. You're back in the Allan for a narrow, slower race through the foggy countryside with some surprisingly convincing effects. Yeah, this is a conversion of an arcade game that never existed. Yeah, it's simple by modern standards, but the handling is perfect for what it's trying to achieve. In a world where you're not paying £25 for a short game, then I would advocate skipping the first one for this. If you're a console owner, you don't have a choice. Lotus 2 is the first one there, on Mega Drive, and confusingly just called Lotus Turbo Challenge. It's not expensive, and everything I've said applies equally to that port, converted like many Amiga games by Electronic Arts. It's not my favourite Lotus though, because there's one more. Got a sense of occasion has Lotus 3, apparently no longer turbo nor a challenge, but let me immediately make the case why it's the best one of the three. Did you like Lotus 2? Did you like how it was a simple arcade experience over a set number of time trial tracks? 3 has that, but better. The 3 difficulty levels from Lotus 1 are back. There's a wider variety of course biomes, and if you like, you can do a single time trial on any course you like using any of the 3 cars you like. 3 cars. Yes, the Lotus M200 concept car is here and slots between the other 2 performance-wise. Don't get excited though, it's really just a slightly faster Allan with a silly wing. I guess you do lose the variety of different cars during the same game, but that's about it. Did you like Lotus 1? Did you like how it had championships with an ongoing points tally and positional racing? Did you like the tactical fuel stops? 3 has that, but better. It's obviously got full screen gameplay unlike the first one. It's got a greater variety of tracks, and if you like you can do a single time trial on any course using any of the 3 cars you like. But 3 isn't finished. While subtitled Ultimate Challenge on computers, the equally good console version, confusingly named Lotus 2, is named after Rex, the grandly named Racing Environment Construction Set, which according to the Mega Drive box, allows you to generate an infinite number of tracks. This is, of course, bollocks. But it is clever. You simply change a bunch of sliders for the length of the track, how curvy you want it to be, hills, obstacles, etc., and choose the scenario and difficulty. If you pay attention to the resolution of the percentage changes, you'll realise each attribute could be a letter, and the result is a one-word code for the track you created which could be sent to anyone else. You can type in the word directly if you like, and you can bet those of us who got this game aged 13 spent most of that time typing in amusingly rude words and then doing multiple races at the Bummodrome. You can even use Yesterzine, or rather Yesterzine, which gives you a lengthy race down a foggy track in the drizzle. Oh, how well it knows me. So yeah, this is the ultimate Lotus, whatever the Lotus 2 fanboys say, which isn't to say they are not both fine games. There's probably no reason to look at Lotus 1 now given the other 2, it just feels a little older and there's nothing there you can't get here anyway. But the curated experience of the Lotus 2 tracks justifies its continued existence on any format. And of course there's that theme tune. It's probably good they stopped here. There's little they could have done on the 16 bits to evolve the concept. Lotus 3 has everything an Amiga arcade racer could usefully have, but with very little fluff. It's hard to see how Lotus 4 could be better. Also, they'd run out of Loti to add until the Elise came along a few years later. Don't feel for Nintendo owners missing out on those Sega-only conversions of the Lotus games, because as they'll tell you themselves, they had Kemco's Top Gear games, which look very similar. A little too similar, in fact. Also, they sound similar. Hang on. Yeah, while they're not identical, the Gremlin credit is the giveaway here. Top Gear 1 and 2 on the SNES are explicitly original implementations of the Lotus engine for the Slinty Ninty. And once you know it, that's obvious. The forced split screen in the first title, for instance, showing the view of an opponent in this case. The music is so close, it's by Barry Leitch, and due to a lack of time, some of it is directly from Lotus 2. The title theme of Top Gear 1 is the credits theme from Lotus 2, for example. The games also include 20-car multi-lap multi-race championships. Now renamed Top Racer for licensing reasons, the rights are held by Pico, and both games are available on Evercade and a smattering of other platforms in a way the Lotus ties will not let the parent games be. The second one especially comes highly recommended. So Magnetic Fields decided to take an entirely different direction from what would be Morris and Southern's last Amiga game. And you'll never guess who they pissed off doing it. It's already weird seeing that logo on something that isn't a racing game, but Kid Vicious is a platformer, although it was released as Kid Chaos after lawyers from the estate of former Sex Pistols screamer Sid Vicious made a couple of phone calls of the "don't even think about it" nature. I've always said there's nothing more punk than trademark protection. Kid Chaos serves mostly to make me smug about a point earlier, because if Venus wants to be 8-bit and Zool wants to be Sonic, Kid Chaos really wants to be Zool. It's got the attitude, it's got the style, and it's also got most of Zool's faults. It wants you to go quick, but frequently punishes you for doing so. It gates the end of levels behind endless collectibles, and those levels are maze-like messes without even Zool's direction arrow. There are enemies, which weirdly do different damage on each level, but given your only method of both traversal and attack is the weird spinning jump, it's 50-50 if anything hits them, and frequently they're placed to catch you off blind jumps. Also, it's got a sodding control reverse power-up. It's not an approach to the platform game I've ever especially been fond of, and this does very little to convince me otherwise. Frankly, I'd rather play Zool. It's really here that Magnetic peters out, rather. Gremlin didn't need them for racing games, they were doing their own, most notably Fatal Racing aka Whiplash. No one wanted another fake Zool platformer. By this point, no one wanted Zool himself. And even if they did, Ocean were in the midst of being sucked into the same infogram Atari quagmire that had later claimed Gremlin. So they went to Europress. Yes, the same Europress that at one time published magazines like Amiga Action. They contracted Magnetic Fields to get back to what they did best, racing. Or rather the subtly different art of rallying, with a game license from the British round of the World Rally Championship. And if we say nothing else about this game, let's acknowledge the Magnetic Fields intro had got fancy. I'm really not going to say anything more about this specific game because there's several of them over the next few years, and much like the Lotus games, the last one, Mobile 1 Rally Championship, has everything. Having played the first one, I was going to make a comment about the music losing something, but then I booted up this, which would become the last ever MF game, and... Now, I'm not going to tell you this is the best music in the world, but I wasn't even sure I'd played this game before. Oh, I've played this game before. Having not heard it, possibly even since university, this intro tune is laser burned into my brain. I recognised it from the first note. And while they're working in a different world, the style here is unmistakable. It's weird in a way. Magnetic were not like, say, Team 17, with legendary musicians employed in-house. The sound in almost every game is by someone different, and yet consistently at least memorable. The game actually looks good. There are various clever patches for it available, but if you search online you will instantly find a version that runs without any of it, and it can do so in 1600 by 1200 as it is here. It's classic late 90s geometry, but effort has gone into making it good. My nerd-like motorsport memory can assure you all these cars and liveries are real and span just about every class of rallying that existed at the time. To play? It's fine. It's good, it's fine. The problem it has is it feels trapped in another era to an extent. By this point, the world was rapidly starting to move on. Colin McRae already existed as a series, for instance. The Evo-produced official games were not far off. By no means is this bad, but the world changed on magnetic fields, and it's a symptom of one of those fundamental gaming shifts. The credits are the giveaway. Southern and Morris are listed as directors. Not developers, not musicians as Southern had been on some early games, not even producers. As games got larger, the Rockstar names just couldn't make the difference anymore. It got Crammond, it got Chris Sawyer, and even Archer McLean wasn't immune. I don't know them, and their lack of presence online these days suggests they like it that way, but I think this didn't suit Morris and Southern. Magnetic Fields quietly disappeared after this game. Morris appears to have done nothing since, although clearly he'd earned enough to retire and buy half a car. Sean kept working. I'm guessing the remains of Magnetic were folded into Warthog, who would produce a smattering of other rally games. Sean was back credited merely as programmer in that era, and was last seen doing tools and tech for Playdemic around 2013. Given they've been through several owners since then, I suspect he's probably retired himself by now. And fair enough. Magnetic Fields didn't change. The world did. And the world didn't need them anymore. But whatever they're now up to, that doesn't change they gave us Lotus, and that's a game that still gets slotted into Amigas, consoles and PCs on the regular to this day. What more can you ask for as a legacy? On the back page, while Southern and Morris dropped out of the games industry, others remained. If you're looking for a modern tribute to the Lotus and Top Gear games, might I recommend this, Horizon Chase Turbo. It's everything you want it to be, and more. It's such a close tribute to Lotus and its Barry Leitch music that the music in it is by Barry Leitch. Wait, is that how you pronounce it?
Barry Leitch, yes.
Thanks, Barry. And it's a great way to leave us with a happy ending, because the mobile version of Horizon has an Easter egg. Draw a heart on the screen during the first San Francisco race, and you get Barry's marriage proposal to his partner.
Will you marry me?
You may not want to propose to anyone, but if you liked Lotus, you'll like this, and there's even a sequel on the way this year. No word if Barry's hidden a safety net proposal in it just in case he needs it though. What you need is to come back the last Friday of the month and watch Yesterzine for June. I do not know what it'll be about. Games probably. If you're at a loss in the meantime and haven't seen it, might I recommend the Master System Competition 2023 retrospective. It's somehow the most watched video on the channel by about 3 times its nearest competitor, and that many people can't all be wrong. Goodbye.